Thanks again for joining us at the 2022 Sloan Sports Analytics Conference Competitive Advantage Talks, presented by Kager, also known as the Craft Analytics Group. My name is Mike Duke, and I'm a first-year MBA student at MIT Sloan. It is my pleasure to introduce the next presentation, Cut Through Sponsorship Noise with Context, presented by Sponsor Pulse. Please join me and welcome to the stage our next presenter, Adam Garu, Chief Product Officer of Sponsor Pulse.
Thank you, man. Hello, hello. It's good to see sponsorship people concentrated in one place. I think we've all been swimming in a sea of non-sponsorship. I hope to add some interesting perspective on some other things that have been touched on in other rooms throughout the day and get started and hopefully have a good discussion. I think if you work in sponsorship, you know you are hounded and constantly assaulted with noise, metrics, social, otherwise. It's a noisy space. With the right list of metrics on a page, you can make any investment decision justified, right? If you cherry pick the right cell out of the Excel sheet, all of a sudden it's a no-brainer. If you pick the one to the left, all of a sudden it's the worst investment you've ever made. We're faced with all sorts of challenges, contending news and views. MLB's never going to come back from a potential lockout. It's going to be stronger than ever. We're overloaded with data. We have incomplete storylines where right until we feel like we've got the perfect little case to make for an investment or a renewal, we're missing a key piece. We have FOMO, or one that my colleague Neil made up, perhaps phobia, the opposite. I'm overinvested. I'm spending too much. Am I spread too thin? We've also got internal politics. The VP's son plays the sport. I really like auto racing, so we're the official sponsor of auto racing, you name it. And then proving value for investment is eternal, and growing uncertainty, especially during COVID. This has been an anxious time to be involved in sponsorship. The world changed overnight, and this industry was flattened and shook up, and it was already a noisy space. What we try to do, and what I'm going to talk about today, is simplifying things. Let's talk about why we do sponsorship. We want to reach consumers, actual human beings, at a point where they care about something probably more than they care about a brand. There are brands that have advocates, have passionate users or things like that, but those are probably few and far between. And if you're selling widgets or you're selling a very competitive category, chances are their local music event or a charitable cause or a musician who's popular on social media or a sport is where they actually open themselves up emotionally to be intercepted. So we're going to share some insights, and we're going to talk about what we learn when we level the playing field and look at it solely from the consumer's perspective. I want to be clear that I understand that sponsorship decision-making can't just rely on how much consumer impact potential there is. There's a million factors, including the assets, the price you're paying, exclusivity, on and on. But what we're trying to do at Sponsor Pulse, and what I'm hopefully sharing with you guys, is a way to talk about it that greatly simplifies that one element in the equation so that we can then roll through the sheets of assets, and then we can then talk about media plans and number of social posts and all those other fun things. Quickly, the data you're going to see, we survey people in 18 countries every single month. We ask them what they care about, what they're going to care about more, what they're going to care about less, what they're passionate about, and things like that. It is, as was kind of referenced in an Adobe talk yesterday, zero-party data. We are doing a little bit old-fashioned stuff and talking to people and asking them questions. We still see great value in this. It's a complement to the kind of analytics you've seen in other presentations in this room. And it still, hopefully, shows you some things that either confirm and give hard facts to things we believe are happening in the marketplace, or maybe opens and reveals something that we might not have known yet was around the corner. I'm going to go as simple as possible today because nobody probably wants to hear me talk about our Magic 7 metrics and all that jazz. So we do look at across different metrics. They include things like as simple as engagement, how big reach is this potential property, down to its momentum and how intense that engagement is. Emotional factors like your excitement and your passion, meaning that in our system, as I hope you would find reasonable, if a property doesn't necessarily have the biggest reach, but those it does reach are intensely passionate about it, it has value, right? We've all seen those properties, or we've worked with them, or we have potentially engaged with them as a competitor. And then we look at potential sponsor impact. And that means How wide is the runway between I like this sports team to I am willing to now be influenced by its sponsors? Frankly, it's a lot wider for charities, it's a lot wider for women's sports than it is for the NFL, right? The assumption of most consumers is the NFL would be fine if they got rid of every logo tomorrow. It's a massive bazillion-dollar business. They don't need sponsors, they're just trying to influence me. I think we know it's a big part of their revenue, and they wouldn't be. Sorry, I just realized I was wearing my mask. I'm Canadian, so we're not quite used to taking those off yet. But I hear that it ended today, so this is what I look like, not the smirk you saw in the headshot. Anyways, so we're going to combine all that stuff into an opportunity score. Two properties can have the same score. One could have low engagement, but incredible passion. Another could have massive reach, but nobody's really passionate about it. I think we know some of those. So I'm going to talk about our data and maybe some trends that I find interesting, because I get to sit behind the scenes and look at this data all day and hunt for my favorite sports. And I'm passionate about disc golf, which is quite embarrassing at times to talk about, but I'm watching that number every single month, hoping frisbee golf gets, I'll call it frisbee golf in case you didn't catch what I was talking about. Looking for the number to go up slightly, and it hasn't. But you know, maybe a finger slip will help push it up another notch on the scale. But anyways, what's next for women's sports? I'm going to make the case today, and I'm not going to even say it. I had something planned to say about it, but both Sue and Ari said it. It's no longer for women's sports a case to make that this should be a CSR initiative, that this is about our corporate initiative to support women. It's a logical business decision. It's a common sense ROI, numbers-based decision to sponsor women's sports at this point. Yes, there's good reasons to do it. Yes, it's important. But also, we are now at a place, and I'll hopefully visualize some of the data that suggests if you stripped the logos away and just said property A and property B, it has a common sense argument to say it's reached a place where it deserves investment on par with things that get far more money. Next, we'll talk about engaging new audiences, kind of some of the streaming shows, things like that, and the impact that that's had, Drive to Succeed, and, or Drive to Survive, rather, sorry. And everybody's on board now. I don't know how you're going to watch them all, but I'll try. And then who might be next? We can't predict what's the future. If I did, I wouldn't be here. I'd be at the casino. But what properties kind of look like the WNBA did 3 years ago in terms of their profile in our data. And if they get that investment, if they get that exposure and they're able to follow through on that potential, what could somebody be up here talking about? Not me, but you know, what property is going to be up here in 3 years and go, here's how we exploded and here's how we got to the promised land. So you've heard it in dozens of talks, and I'm happy to hear it. You probably don't need to hear it from me, a guy, but I'm going to talk about it from a business case perspective. There's a million reasons to invest in women's sports, but let's see what the data says. 2019, there was a pretty clear hierarchy. This is our opportunity score. I just want to remind you that that combines everything from reach down to how passionate you are about that property. No surprise, FIFA Women's World Cup was probably top of the hierarchy. When that was like, it's the case for everything. You put a jersey on, you put the stars and stripes, or the maple leaf in my case, people watch, right? We had a very successful Women's World Cup in France. It was the top dog in terms of our database. I know there's more women's sports than on this page, but I just picked the top 4 that came through. The Women's Tennis Association, not a surprise to be second kind of fiddle there. Serena, you name it, obvious to us. And then you've got the W and the LPGA in a clear kind of 3rd and 4th position. So there was a clear hierarchy, and I'm sorry, some chart aspects seem to have messed up here, but hopefully you get the picture. And then this is trended, kind of got squished, but 13 to 64-year-olds, there's a new hierarchy. The WNBA has gone like this. Everything's risen, but the WNBA's growth has outpaced the other women's sports properties. While we're still about to have another FIFA Women's World Cup, expect that kind of cyclical pattern for that property. It's not on every day, right? It comes and goes. That's a very different property than one that has an 82-game season or what have you. We now have a different hierarchy where the WNBA has absolutely cemented itself within the world of women's sports. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're not just here to rank women's sports 1 through 4. We're here to talk about how they compare to other investment opportunities that might be outside women's sports. So we'll talk about the WNBA specifically. In our data, it's big. We're talking engaging 80 million Americans almost. And when I say engagement here, it's everything from talking about your friends to sharing a highlight to going to a game. We know the world is no longer linear in the sense that to be a fan, I either have to go to a game or tune into a broadcast. It can be following highlight her, right? We're seeing from a sponsorship perspective, if that clip of Asia Wilson includes some sponsorship backdrop while she does an amazing play, that's reach, right? It doesn't have to be through the owned channels. And you can see some, sizing the metrics here. When we just talk about millions of consumers who are either engaged or passionate about this property, it's a sizable proposition. Already proven in some other talks, but I've got my data point too. The most highly engaged is male segments. So this is me, WNBA fan. I hope some in here as well. Watching, getting hooked because League Pass was affordable, and finding a team. God, I hope they put a team in Toronto. But it's a reminder that this is not necessarily women watching women. It's sports fans watching women. So if we dove into the database of 800 properties, things you could sponsor, I want to be clear, Sponsor Pulse looks at everything you could possibly tie a brand to. So what you'll see on here, you'll see in a few slides, Joe Rogan Experience. You can sponsor that. It's not necessarily a property, the same thing as calling up the New York Knicks and saying, I want it. But you can build a causal platform around leukemia and lymphoma. Lots of brands do that, right? They pick a charity platform. And one of the things that I think is powerful is all of these are fighting for the same dollars, but we don't have the same metrics for them. We have metrics for the sports teams we get involved with. We've got different metrics for the charities we get involved with. Our unifying kind of perspective to put them on the same page is what is their reach? How passionate are people about it, and how favorable do they become when a brand gets involved? So if you took the 800 things we could look at 3 years ago and said, what looks most like the opportunity with the WNBA, this was kind of the competitive context. Here would be comparable investments to potentially looking at the WNBA. And you can see that this is good company, don't get me wrong. But we're talking about the X Games, Bellator, which is kind of a second fiddle to the UFC. I mean, I'm sorry if somebody from Bellator is here and wants to dispute that. But Cirque du Soleil, Tony Awards, a one-night event. And you can see there are other sports properties in the mix in terms of their potential, but they're kind of one weekend. Ryder Cup, or sorry, Ryder Cup's a little longer than that, but you know what I'm saying. Or English Premier League, which is extremely popular, but we're talking in the United States, right? So if you were to look at this and say, what kind of dollars should the WNBA be commanding 3 years ago? I think it's not that absurd. It felt like kind of what it is. This is a reminder that these are the properties that matched closest with the WNBA 3 years ago. This isn't the full scope of what we track. If we drop the big marble in the pool, you see exactly what kind of context we're talking about. So the NFL, of course, is number one. Beats everything. It's always probably going to be the case. But you can see some context there, just how much bigger the opportunity would have been with the NFL for some context outside just that pack of sponsorship opportunities we talked about. And I apologize if somebody is here from the World Surfing Federation. I threw that in just to show you something smaller than the WNBA. I think surfing's cool, but it doesn't quite have the same media exposure of these other properties. So if you kind of crystallize this picture in your head and say, at least our perspective would be 3 years ago, the WNBA's opportunity looked comparable to the things on the screen. Let's go to today. Let's see who they fight with now or who they deserve to be fighting with. It's changed radically. And the blue chip quality of a lot of the properties that have comparable opportunity is clear. We've moved from smaller events like maybe the NHL All-Star Weekend. I'm a Canadian, so that's a big deal for me. But in the States, obviously, it's not exactly everything to everyone. To the NHL Stanley Cup Finals. So that's now the comp, in terms of a potential platform. We move to the PGA as a whole, AEW, massive wrestling property, ATP, WTA. Some of these have changed on their own, and yes, you can see St. Patrick's Day in there. Brands associate with St. Patrick's Day, and we want to have a comp. Maybe we spend $20 million activating around St. Patrick's Day as a passion point for Americans. How does that compare to potentially activating around the WNBA? So first point is, from competitive context, the aim is not to just show a trend line of the WNBA going up by itself and hoping that makes the point. What we're trying to say is we have joined a new competitive context, and we have a new kind of cohort of comps that we can talk about, and it's kind of like buying a house. I'm going to make that analogy. It's not perfect, right? But every house is unique, but to get some grounding on how much you should pay for this house, and I know I'm talking to a lot of students in the room, so it's probably fantasy to talk about buying a house in the markets we're dealing with today. But when you buy a house, you're looking for comps. That one sold for $1 million, that one sold for 1.2, and you're trying to anchor your investment to those. And that's kind of what we're trying to do here in saying that the WNBA, yes, has metrics that show it's shooting on a positive trend line, but it's joined the company of properties that command more investment than the WNBA is getting. And then let's drop that NFL marble back in, and you can see, I mean, I should have split screened it, and I'm not that good at animations and things like that, but you can see that the scale difference isn't the same. The NFL's not shouting down to the WNBA, so to speak, in the same way. I will click through. So that was a little piece on kind of some of the facts and the case for women's sport investment, even if you weren't an advocate. Even if you weren't, I went to a talk the other day and said, kind of stop being an ally, start being an accomplice, which I quite liked. And so you can see that case has been made, I think, through competitive context. It's a simple way to talk about it. It can go through the boardrooms. One of the challenges we have as data people is typically our explanations don't carry well to the C-suite. It turns into trust us. There's an algorithm that says this is the right decision. I'm going to talk a bit more about something else, which is over-the-top services and the kind of content and streaming series explosion. One thing is that people who sign up for over-the-top services are far more engaged with sports properties. Not a surprise. They like watching video things on their television, and some of that is sports, and some of that is streaming content. It's exploding, and the fine folks at MIT made us lock this presentation in, but there's also a nice synergy with what I just spoke about. If you're not aware, the Kansas City NWSL team this coming season is doing their own behind-the-scenes piece. So again, another opportunity to kind of bring these two together. But Formula One set the stage. Now everybody's got their streaming series. But you can see in the United States, I would talk endlessly. I'm a Formula One fan. There's a race in Canada that's quite fun to go to. And when you come to the States, sometimes the influence of Formula One is understated because there's such great racing in the United States, right? IndyCar, NASCAR, on and on. But you can see the trend line for Formula One engagement in the United States clearly has some power when we start talking about this Netflix series that I'm assuming many of us watched. But the top line there is NASCAR. And sorry, the legends didn't come through here, but you can see NASCAR's defended its position. NASCAR is still the top dog in domestic racing in the United States, but Formula One's starting to challenge. And sorry, again, the legend trouble. Trust me, these are other domestic racing series like IndyCar, like IMSA, and things like that in the United States. You can see how the hierarchy's changed, right? Formula One is now clearly the second most attractive sponsorship opportunity in the United States to NASCAR. And there's 4 races coming, I think Miami, somebody can remind me. Austin's obviously a blast if you haven't been. So let me try to get to what might be around the corner. I can't predict the future. Potential doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen. As you've heard from other talks, like, we have to invest. We have to find ways to capture that good intent people have of saying, I'm interested in this, but if I can't find it on the dial, if I can't find a streaming service to watch it, it doesn't count for anything. So what are poised to potentially turn the corner here and be on a slide like this where we show a 3-year delta and say, look at how it's exploded. So I looked at which properties have relatively modest engagement, meaning they don't reach very many people right now, but they have extremely strong momentum. And that's consumer intent to say, I want more of it. I'm going to watch more of it. I'm going to attend more of it. And kind of cut through the database to see what we would have. Formula E tops the charts. It's a great opportunity for this property in the United States. I have no investment. I don't own a share of it. I'm not friends with anybody at Formula E. It just came to the top of the spreadsheet when I finished my analysis. But here we've got the racing series that's a bit of a feeder series to Formula One, but it's all electric. Eventually, Formula One's not going to be able probably to stand up and say, we burn however many liters of fossil fuels to put on this show. And the stories they tell about the engineering that it goes into this, when everybody's driving an electric vehicle, TBD, the world seems to be going that way. The innovations they'll be coming up with that rely on petrol won't be that interesting, right? It's got to be electric innovations. So Formula E has that niche engagement but high momentum. The second is specific entities within esports. So I'm talking specific teams, specific platforms, specific networks within esports are showing this kind of momentum. Not just esports, I think we've all seen it tracked kind of broadly, right? The entire universe of esports. Another wave of international soccer leagues look like this in the United States. 5 years ago, I feel like everybody kind of chose their favorite Premier League team, right? There was diehards who already had a team, but we all kind of, as North Americans, decided, oh yeah, I'm a Man U fan, and kind of fell onto that wonderful world of Premier League soccer. Well, Bundesliga, Serie A, they're all coming. They're getting access through Fubo TV and in Canada, services like DAZN, and the soccer is exceptional, the players are global, and those are coming for us as well. And then emerging sports like drone racing and handball and paintball. Whether or not they'll be able to find the media exposure to capitalize on that opportunity is another story. And I threw in pickleball because I think we all maybe saw the New York Times article about how it's the fastest growing sport in all of history. So if we were to put some context together, and I know I've gone into my QA time, so I apologize, I will be here if you have a good question, but I want to show my slides. What brands would be the best fit with Formula E? BMW, number one. Probably not a surprise. I'm a racing fan. I like performance vehicles. I like electrification. BMW is a natural fit. But what I'd like to call out is across the, I don't know, however many hundreds of brands we track, US Bank's in the mix. There's alignment between a financial services provider and this potential sponsorship opportunity. It's not just endemic things like video gaming and Puma, who already sponsor Mercedes-Benz. It's other brands. And it's not all roses. I want to be clear, I picked brands that have high engagement and high customer connection with the property. There's lots of brands that probably, arguably, should not spend a lot of money with Formula E. And I don't mean to, Visa's in the mix, it's CPG. It's not there yet, but the argument would be Crest toothpaste probably doesn't need to be banging down the door of Formula E. There isn't great alignment right now. Maybe in the future there will be. We'll talk esports quickly. So this is top categories amongst those who engage with esports, gaming. If that wasn't the first data point, I would hope you would drag me off the stage and say, that doesn't make any sense. So gaming is number one, crypto's number two, connected devices, all of it's making sense, but the context helps us also say, well, if crypto is a natural fit for an esports or a gaming conversation, what about some of these other categories that aren't obvious? Dating apps. Maybe the next League of Legends final will see somebody with a Bumble badge on their shoulder. Banking, home purchases and home financing. Cannabis, a little more common sponsorship in Canada than perhaps in the United States, but it's coming. And auto tires as well. And then lastly, I'll say sponsorship portfolios, as I said, cross categories. It's not just about having a sports portfolio, it's about having charities that feed and work together and allow us to do cross things. So if you go about properties that gamers care about, strip away esports, Disney's number one. NFL's number two. Marvel. NBA. Recycling. Potentially causal platforms about helping the environment. St. Jude's Hospital, which you often see the badge on suit jackets. Even the 4th of July and activating around Independence Day. So there's evidence here from the competitive context that an esports investment doesn't just need to be about reaching people who like gaming and esports. It can be part of a richer sponsorship portfolio where you're hitting people with things they care about in the same context. So I made the analogy. I think it's easier for sponsorship decision makers to have comps when they're having conversations. This is comparable to this is comparable to that, rather than yelling impression numbers at each other or trying to get to the biggest, latest magic metric kind of conversation. They have a role. The due diligence has to be done. The comparisons have to be made. But from a strategic discussion perspective, when we're saying, how does this compare to that? Am I over-invested here? I believe competitive context can help when we open the doors and not just compare the NBA team we're considering investing into another NBA team we invest in, but saying, if we spend $20 million with them, we also spend $20 million on our music festival program. How do those stack up? Why don't I spend $40 million over here instead of 20 and 20? So I'll quickly close. Consumer context helps crystallize all that. Consider beyond the world of just sports and look at cause and charity, and growth drivers can help us see what's around the next corner. And that was somebody else briefly, but that was the end. Thank you. If there's time for questions, I will take them, but I also cannot take them.
Yeah, we can do a question or two if anyone has one.
Hey Adam, I was just wondering how you relate opportunity score to like the financial value of what you're gonna do. Like for example, a NASCAR sponsorship for a weekend would be like $300,000 to $500,000, while F1 could be like 10 million and it has a lower score. How would you like define to a company like what the monetary reasonable price would be?
When you spend there, there's a lot of factors that go into the ROI calculation. It's not just about marketing value, right? There can be direct business, right? We are their official bank, and we make bazillions of dollars handling their financial transactions. So one is when the final tallies kind of run up, it can lead us to understand that we're overinvested. It can make the case for that other $300,000 and $400,000 investment to say it has as much consumer punch as that other one that we're overpriced in. But there may be a gap absolutely between those two numbers that comes from the balance sheet, not necessarily the consumer marketing potential.
And then we can do one more question.
It's all good.
All right.
I'm down to 17 seconds, so
Thank you very much.
thank you.